Now that we have the dependencies installed, we will start to make some changes to the code that we have created so far. So the first thing that I'm going to do is open the user model, because we're going to apply some changes in here. So first of all, our user at the moment only has a name, so we'll definitely need to extend this model so that in our database we have a place where we can store a username and a password as well. So let's add username here, which will have a data type of string. And let's make sure that this is set to be unique. So we set this unique flag to true, and we can do additional validations using the sequelize model definition here. For example, validate, we could do not empty and then true. So this is going to say that the username should not be empty. And then we add a password as well that again has a data type of string. And for validation, we're going to say that not empty should be true. Now we could do additional things, like we could say the length, and then we could specify an array to say the minimum length of the password is 4, the maximum is 16. So what I recommend you to do is to look up the sequelize model definition and see all these options that you can pass in to the sequelize models that you want to create. Okay, so that's done. So that means that for the load dummy data file that we have, we should also make sure that we adhere to this new model definition and that we create username and password fields. And we need to do this for all these users. Now, there's no correlation between the username and the name. I just added the same username as the name, but with a lowercase letter, but we could have added any other piece of information there. So let's save this. Let's save users as well. And let's rerun the load dummy data.js file. And we now see that when the user gets inserted, we get the name, the username, and the password columns, and we get the username and password inserted into the database as well. Now, if you have some issues rerunning this command and the database does not contain the latest users, make sure that you have the force true flag set to true in the sync method. Now, it's good that we updated the model and it's good that we have this data in the database, but of course what's not good is the fact that the password is in kind of a plain text, right? I can read what the password is, and this is some really bad design. So what we should do, of course, is make sure that we hash the password. Now, luckily for us, the sequelize model definition allows us to do something like user.beforeCreate. So before creating the actual user, we can do something with the user. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take user.password. So I'm going to take the password property of the user model and apply some hashing to it, right? So we need to write this functionality. So the way you should read this is that before creating the actual user, so before doing the actual insert to the database, run these modifications. And what the modification is going to be is that we're going to update the password property to have a hashed value. So how can we do that? Well, we should probably have a method somewhere in here called hash password, or you can name it whatever you want, but the functionality should be that we send back a hashed version of the password. And yet again, I'm going to say that we are lucky because sequelize allows us to add custom methods to a model, and we can add class methods and we can add instance methods. So if you wonder what the difference is, a class is basically the object you get when you call the sequelize.define methods, and basically the methods that you add on the class are defined for the entire database table, and the instance is like one piece of that class, so that would be a row in the table itself. So creating an instance method is going to be callable for each row that we want to insert or we want to operate on in Sequelize. Okay, so if you wonder about these two custom methods that we can add, we're going to be using the instance method since we want to do some action every time when a single row is inserted into the database. So in light of this, all we need to do is type in user and then do prototype hash password. So this is going to be the name of our function that we want to execute, and we use the JavaScript prototyper inheritance, and this is how you add an instance method to the user model. So what should this hash password do? Well, remember we did install a dependency before, and that is the bcrypt dependency. So let's bring that in now. And the bcrypt has a method that we can use. So we can do something like bcrypt.hash this.password. So because we use the prototype inheritance in JavaScript, we can access the password by referencing this, right? So that's going to be referencing the actual password in our model. Very important to note that I'm not using the arrow function here. Should I use the arrow function, that this value would change and I would not be able to access this.password. So make sure you type out the keyword function in here. And then we need to provide a salt round as well, so that's going to be 10. So let's make this return. Now we could run this, but this is not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Well, this hash method returns us a promise. So that means that we would have to do some then statements at the place where we call this particular hash password function. Now again, luckily for us, the latest JavaScript addition to the language was an async and await keyword combination, so we can make this an asynchronous function and we can await the result of this particular promise. So setting it up this way will allow us to call this hash password function without waiting for the promise, because this statement is going to wait for that. So let's come back here, and what we need to do is user.password should be equal to await user dot, and now we can access the method that we created, right? So that's hash password and then hash user dot password. Now if you know how async await works in JavaScript, you will already know that this won't work, because await is only valid if we use it in conjunction with the async keyword. So let's make this user callback function asynchronous. So this is it, and now we make sure that when we insert the user password is going to be hashed. So let's save this and let's rerun our data load here. So that's load dummy data. Okay, and if you check now, the insert statements for the users and now obfuscate the password, right? So I can no longer see the password, and it has been hashed. And notice here we're using the bcrypt hashing algorithm, and we applied 10 salt rounds to the password itself. So that's what this piece of information here is for, if you've been wondering. Okay, so far so good. So basically we've updated our model and we have enabled hashing for the password when we insert the data. So in the next video, we'll take a look at what we need to do at the type definition and then the schema levels as well, to make sure that we actually use this updated model in a GraphQL context.